Welcome to episode 32 of Posture Labs and Alignment Fundamentals. Today we're covering another back bend called Camel Pose or Ustrasana. This is a pretty intense back bend, so I would recommend warming up a little bit. Do some cat-cows or maybe some of my other back bend tutorials before this. Or if you're just watching to learn something, totally fine. Just know you should probably warm up a little bit before doing this, especially if it's like first thing in the morning and you're not warm at all. For Camel Pose, we'll be standing on our knees. I want your knees about hip width distance. So you can pretty easily see that, but if not, you can always take a block. I usually like the short width of the block beneath my between my knees to kind of tell where my hips distance is at. Now, ideally in your camel pose, your toes will be untucked. That's the quote-unquote fullest variation. However, I'm going to give you a lot of different options and some options with the blocks here. Now, during your camel pose, we like to kind of sink back, but I want you to think about keeping your hips over your knees. So that means pushing your hips forward. Now, before you go into camel pose, I always like to bring the hands to the low back and kind of imagine moving the tailbone down, like you're moving the tailbone towards the back of the knees. Now, kind of imagine picking your back ribs up. So I like with an inhale, think about lifting these back ribs, almost like you're gonna lean back over a wall behind you. So instead of just dumping back, you feel a push of the tailbone down, a lift of your back ribs. That's creating a little bit more length in your lumbar spine, so you're actually getting a bit of a deeper, safer back bend than just crunching into your vertebrae and dumping back. So fingertips pointing down, move your tailbone down a little bit. Inhale, pick your back ribs up. Your hands, you use them to push your hips forward and then lean back. So keep pushing those hips forward. Now this is a great place to be. If you want to move on, you can always start with a block. I like a block kind of right inside, maybe 2 blocks, so one is by each heel. And start with the blocks on the tall height. So as you start to lean back, you can start to reach your hands back towards the blocks. Now, as we do this, we tend to sink the hips back. So now, because you don't have the hands there, you have to think about pushing the hips forward, pushing your spine in towards your heart. If it feels okay on your neck, you can drop your head back. Now, if you don't have blocks to use, another option is to tuck your toes. So with the toes tucked, you don't get as much leverage as a block, but you get a few extra inches because now you're not reaching down for your heels are lifted a bit. So start the same way, move your tailbone down, pick your back ribs up, push your hips forward and lean back. Now you might start by reaching one hand for your heel, other hand for your heel. Remember to keep pushing your hips forward, kind of squeeze the shoulder blades together, maybe drop your head back. Keep pushing your hips forward, spine up and in, stretch your throat. And release, come back up. Come back up nice and slow. Don't try to slingshot yourself out of it. You could get a little bit dizzy. Now, the final option, tops of the feet down, hands to the low back. Move your tailbone down, pick your back ribs up, and then lean back. Think elbows a little bit closer to each other. I like to firm the glutes to push the hips forward. One or both hands at a time can reach back for your heels. Now you're pressing down into the tops of the feet, pushing your hips forward. With the tops of the feet down, you can almost kind of feel like you're trying to grab your heels and pull them up. So I like the way this feels the best. It's kind of hard to talk while I'm in the pose. So I like that one the best because you can almost feel like you're gripping on your heels and trying to really push your hips forward and almost lift your chest back up. To me, I'm using my body then to kind of stretch itself instead of grabbing the heels and trying to like stabilize, especially with the toes tucked. There's more of a chance that your heel could spin out or in, and that obviously isn't going to feel nice. So you just have to be a little bit more gentle. Whereas if the tops of your feet are down, there's not so much of a chance that you can roll your ankle. So you can kind of grip or push a little bit more without being so careful. The blocks are great because you can always start on the tall height, then go medium height. Once you get to that lowest height, that's probably going to be lower than, even the medium height for me is about the same height as my foot. So really I would say use the block, then try with your toes tucked, and then try with the tops of your feet down. You can always do like a single arm camel pose as well. Sometimes that feels nice. Sometimes we do this in my class as well. You're going to try to push your hips forward, and then instead of really dumping over to this side, I want you to kind of square your shoulders and look up at that lifted hand. And if your left hand's reaching back towards your left heel, keep pushing your hips forward. Try not to dump to the left side. Keep it even and come back up. It's great to do a counter stretch after this. Any sort of rounding into your back. I like cat pose. You could do rabbit pose, or even kind of like a child's pose with your arms by your side. It's a pretty intense back bend, so again, I would always recommend warming up, some cat-cows, maybe some more gentle back bends, even some twisting first, and then always take a counter pose or a counter stretch afterwards. If you have any other tips or tricks for Ustrasana, Camel Pose, please go ahead and let me know in the comments. Yeah, that's about it. It's a challenging pose, but it is pretty straightforward. I'd say the more you practice, the easier it becomes. Let me know if you enjoyed this tutorial and check back next week for another one. Thank you so much.